Imagine diving into crystal-clear Pacific waters, searching for hammerhead sharks, when suddenly the ocean floor reveals something that shouldn't exist. Massive stone steps descending into darkness. Perfect right angles carved with impossible precision. Terraces that seem to defy nature itself. What you're looking at could rewrite everything we thought we knew about ancient civilizations. This is the story of Japan's most controversial discovery, a submerged monument that has divided scientists for decades. Some call it the greatest archaeological find of the century. Others dismiss it as nothing more than weathered rock. But here's what makes this mystery so compelling. The deeper you dig into the evidence, the more questions emerge that no one seems able to answer. Welcome to Bedtime History. Tonight, we're diving into the depths of one of the most hotly debated underwater structures on Earth, the Yonaguni Monument. A colossal formation lying beneath the waves off Japan's southernmost island that has sparked a scientific war lasting nearly 4 decades. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why this single discovery has the power to challenge our entire understanding of prehistoric human civilization. But first, let me tell you why this story matters more than you might think. Because if the most radical theories about Yonaguni prove true, we're not just looking at some ancient ruins. We're staring at evidence that advanced civilizations existed thousands of years before we thought possible. And that changes everything. The year was 1986. The place was Yonaguni Island, a tiny speck of land floating in the East China Sea, closer to Taiwan than to mainland Japan. This remote outpost had become something of a mecca for Japanese scuba divers, drawn by one of nature's most spectacular displays. Every winter, massive schools of hammerhead sharks migrate through these waters, creating underwater tornadoes of predators that can number in the hundreds. Kihachiro Aratake was no ordinary diver. As director of the Yonaguni Tourism Association, he spent his days guiding visitors through these shark-infested waters. But on this particular dive, Aratake wasn't looking up at the circling hammerheads. Something on the ocean floor had caught his attention, something that made him forget about the sharks entirely. What he found defied explanation. Rising from the seabed, 25 meters beneath the surface, was a structure that seemed to challenge the very laws of nature. Massive stone blocks, arranged in perfect geometric patterns, steps that descended with mathematical precision. Surfaces so flat and smooth they looked like they'd been carved by master craftsmen, not sculpted by millions of years of ocean currents. The monument, as it would come to be known, was enormous, 100 meters long, 60 meters wide, standing as tall as an 8-story building. The sheer scale was breathtaking, but it was the details that made Aratake's heart race. Sharp corners that formed perfect 90-degree angles. Parallel lines that stretched for dozens of meters without deviation. Terraced levels that seemed to follow a deliberate architectural plan. But here's where the story gets strange. Aratake's discovery didn't make international headlines. There were no emergency archaeological expeditions, no government investigations. For years, the monument remained largely unknown outside Japan's diving community. And when scientists finally began studying it seriously, they couldn't agree on the most basic question of all: was this thing natural or artificial? That question would spark one of the most passionate scientific debates of the modern era, because determining the origin of Yonaguni isn't just an academic exercise. It's a mystery that could fundamentally alter our understanding of human history. Enter Professor Masaaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of the Ryukyus, whose credentials read like a catalogue of scientific achievement. Specializing in marine geology, geophysics, seismology, and volcanology, Kimura had built his reputation on solid, conservative research. He'd successfully predicted volcanic eruptions across Japan and spent decades studying the formation of ocean trenches. This was not a man given to wild theories or sensational claims. But when Kimura first descended to examine the Yonaguni monument, something changed. After more than 15 years of meticulous study, diving the site hundreds of times, measuring every angle, and documenting every feature, he reached a conclusion that would make him one of the most controversial figures in modern archaeology. The monument, Kimura declared, was artificial, built by human hands in an age when such construction should have been impossible. His evidence was compelling and detailed. Kimura identified what appeared to be roads winding around the complex, stone carvings that resembled animals, holes where wooden posts might once have stood. But it was the monument's geometric precision that convinced him most of all. The structure displayed straight lines, sharp corners, and sophisticated engineering that seemed far beyond the capabilities of natural erosion. According to Kimura's analysis, the monument contained recognizable architectural elements, a pyramid-like structure at its center, what appeared to be castle foundations, step terraces that could have served as gathering places or ceremonial platforms. Even more intriguingly, he claimed to have found evidence of drainage systems and carved symbols that resembled ancient Japanese writing. But Kimura's most shocking conclusion wasn't about what the monument was, it was about when it was built. Based on the structure's depth and the known history of sea level changes, he calculated that the monument must have been constructed when it was still above water. That meant it was at least 10,000 years old, possibly much older, dating back to the end of the last ice age, when sea levels were dramatically lower than today. If Kimura was right, the implications were staggering. 10,000 years ago, according to conventional archaeology, Japan was inhabited by hunter-gatherer societies using stone tools and living in simple settlements. The idea that such cultures could have created monumental architecture rivaling the Great Pyramids seemed impossible. Yet here was physical evidence, lying on the ocean floor, that suggested otherwise. But Kimura wasn't content with speculation. He continued his research, using advanced dating techniques to narrow down the monument's age. Carbon-14 and beryllium-10 analysis of coral samples attached to the structure yielded surprising results. The monument appeared to be between 2,000 and 3,000 years old, significantly younger than his initial estimate, but still ancient enough to challenge conventional historical timelines. This revised dating placed the monument's construction during Japan's Yayoi period, an era characterized by the introduction of rice agriculture and bronze tools. While this was a time of significant cultural development, the engineering sophistication required to build something like Yonaguni still seemed beyond the capabilities of known Yayoi communities. Kimura's research methodology was exhaustive. He created detailed topographical maps of the entire structure. He analyzed the composition of the stone, confirming it was made of sandstone and mudstone from the Lower Miocene period, deposited roughly 20 million years ago. He studied the monument's relationship to the surrounding geology, noting how it differed from natural rock formations in the area. Most convincingly, Kimura pointed to specific features that seemed to demonstrate human intervention: tool marks on stone surfaces, retaining walls that appeared to have been built to prevent erosion, carved monuments in the shape of turtles, even a massive stone relief depicting animals, including what he identified as horse-like figures, resembling characters from an ancient local writing system known as Kaida script. But for every piece of evidence Kimura presented, skeptics raised equally compelling counter-arguments. The monument's location in an earthquake-prone region meant the rocks were naturally fractured in regular patterns. The area's strong ocean currents could account for the smooth, polished surfaces, and the geometric shapes that seemed so artificial might simply be the result of millions of years of systematic erosion along natural fault lines. The scientific community remained divided. Some researchers supported Kimura's conclusions, citing the monument's unusual concentration of geometric features in such a small area. Others dismissed his interpretations as wishful thinking, seeing patterns where none existed. The debate grew heated, with professional reputations and academic careers hanging in the balance. What made the controversy even more intense was the complete absence of supporting archaeological evidence. Despite decades of investigation, No tools, pottery, or other artifacts had been discovered at the site. No written records or oral histories from the region mentioned an ancient civilization capable of such construction. The monument stood alone, a massive enigma surrounded by questions that seemed to have no answers. Yet the mystery of Yonaguni refused to fade away. If anything, it grew more compelling with each passing year, drawing researchers from around the world who hoped to solve one of archaeology's greatest puzzles. As word of the monument spread through academic circles, it attracted the attention of another prominent scientist whose involvement would fundamentally change the nature of the debate. Dr. Robert Schoch arrived in Japan with impeccable credentials and an open mind, but also with the kind of rigorous scientific skepticism that had made him one of America's most respected geologists. Schoch wasn't just any researcher. As an associate professor at Boston University, he had built his reputation on challenging conventional wisdom when the evidence demanded it. He was already known for controversial work, suggesting that Egypt's Great Sphinx was far older than traditionally believed, dating its construction to before the end of the last ice age. If anyone would be sympathetic to theories about ancient, forgotten civilizations, it would be Schoch. But science doesn't bend to personal preferences or romantic notions. When Schoch made his first dive to examine the Yonaguni monument, he brought with him decades of experience reading geological formations. What he found beneath those Pacific waters would surprise everyone, including himself. After multiple visits to the site and dozens of careful dives, Schoch reached a conclusion that stunned both supporters and skeptics of the artificial origin theory. Despite his personal interest in finding evidence of advanced ancient civilizations, despite the monument's undeniable visual impact, Schoch had to report that he believed the structure was primarily natural. His reasoning was methodical and devastating to Kimura's theories. The sandstone that comprised the monument, Schoch observed, contained numerous well-defined, parallel bedding planes, along which rock layers naturally separated. The entire geological formation was crisscrossed by sets of parallel, vertically oriented joints, natural fractures that explained how the rectangular shapes seen throughout the area likely formed. These weren't random cracks, Schoch explained. They were systematic patterns created by millions of years of geological stress. The rocks of the region broke along both horizontal and vertical planes, naturally creating the step-like appearance that had so impressed early observers. And this phenomenon wasn't unique to the underwater monument. Similar formations could be found on the surface of Yonaguni Island itself, where wind and rain had carved identical geometric patterns into the exposed bedrock. The more Schoch compared the natural weathering features visible on the modern coast with the structural characteristics of the underwater monument, the more convinced he became that geological processes, not human engineering, were responsible for its creation. The monument's 90-degree angles, which seemed so artificial to casual observers, were actually common in sandstone formations when erosion occurred along natural fracture lines. The area's powerful ocean currents had simply accelerated and refined these natural processes over thousands of years. But Schoch didn't stop there. He conducted systematic surveys of the surrounding area, documenting similar formations throughout the region. North of the main monument, he found numerous smaller structures exhibiting identical characteristics. All showed the same geometric precision, the same step-like terracing, the same smooth surfaces that had convinced others of human involvement. Yet these formations were clearly natural, carved by the same geological forces that had shaped the larger monument. However, Schoch's analysis contained a crucial nuance that many overlooked in the heated debates that followed. While he concluded that the monument was primarily natural, he didn't rule out all human involvement. The evidence on Yonaguni Island itself suggested very ancient human habitation, including tombs and other structures artificially carved from bedrock. These surface features, Schoch noted, appeared to mimic and were stylistically inspired by the natural step-like formations, including those now submerged beneath the ocean. This observation led Schoch to propose a middle ground that satisfied neither extreme position in the debate. He suggested that while the Yonaguni monument might be over 95% natural, certain parts may have been enhanced or modified by ancient humans. The prehistoric inhabitants of the island, he theorized, might have admired the natural formation and utilized it for their own purposes, perhaps adding minor modifications while leaving the basic structure untouched. To illustrate his point, Schoch drew an analogy to the famous prehistoric cave paintings of Europe. The caves themselves were natural formations, though possibly enlarged in places by human activity. But they had been utilized by ancient humans, who decorated their walls and ceilings with artificial artwork. The Yonaguni monument, he suggested, might represent a similar collaboration between natural geological processes and human enhancement. This hybrid theory offered a compromise that acknowledged both the monument's impressive natural formation and the possibility of ancient human interaction with the site. But compromises rarely satisfy passionate advocates on either side of a scientific debate. Supporters of the artificial origin theory felt that Schoch was dismissing compelling evidence of advanced ancient engineering. Natural formation advocates believed he was making unnecessary concessions to romantic speculation. The controversy deepened when other researchers entered the fray, each bringing their own expertise and perspectives to the puzzle. Patrick Nunn, a professor of oceanic geoscience at the University of the South Pacific, conducted his own analysis and supported Schoch's conclusions about natural formation. Government agencies, including Japan's Agency for Cultural Affairs and the government of Okinawa Prefecture, declined to recognize the monument as an important cultural artifact, effectively siding with the natural formation camp. But the debate took an interesting turn in 2019, when a team of Japanese researchers led by Takayuki Ogata conducted a comprehensive topographical analysis using advanced digital elevation models. Their geological field investigations examined the strata, rocks, and microtopography of similar formations at 3 locations on Yonaguni Island known as geosites. Their conclusion was unambiguous. The monument, despite its artificial appearance, was a natural feature formed by weathering and erosional processes acting on the bedding and linear joints in sandstone. The Ogata study was particularly significant because it provided the first systematic comparison between the underwater monument and confirmed natural formations on the island's surface. The researchers found that similar features could be observed at multiple locations, all clearly natural in origin. The implication was clear: if identical formations on land were undoubtedly natural, the underwater monument was likely natural as well. Yet even this seemingly definitive research failed to end the controversy. Supporters of artificial origin, including popular author Graham Hancock, acknowledged that individual features seen at Yonaguni could indeed be found in natural sandstone formations worldwide. But they argued that the concentration of so many peculiar formations in such a small area was statistically improbable. They also pointed to the relative absence of loose stone blocks on the monument's flat surfaces, which would be expected if the structure had been formed solely by natural erosion and fracturing. This absence of debris became a key point in the ongoing debate. Natural erosion typically leaves behind fallen rocks and accumulated sediment. Yet the monument's terraces were remarkably clean, almost as if they had been deliberately maintained. Was this evidence of human activity, or could natural processes account for the removal of debris over thousands of years? The question remained tantalizingly unanswered, ensuring that the Yonaguni monument would continue to divide scientific opinion and capture public imagination for years to come. The debate surrounding Yonaguni had transformed from a scientific discussion into something approaching a cultural phenomenon. But beneath all the academic arguments and passionate theories lay a more fundamental question that nobody seemed willing to address directly. What if we were asking the wrong questions entirely? The monument's discovery had coincided with a period of unprecedented technological advancement in underwater exploration. Sophisticated sonar mapping, underwater photography, and advanced diving equipment were revealing hidden worlds beneath the oceans at an unprecedented rate. Shipwrecks that had been lost for centuries were being discovered and explored. Ancient harbors and submerged settlements were emerging from the depths of the Mediterranean. The ocean floor was yielding secrets that had been buried for millennia. Yet, Yonaguni remained stubbornly enigmatic. Unlike other underwater archaeological sites, it offered no clear narrative, no pottery shards to date, no metal artifacts to analyze, no human remains to study. Just stone, massive, geometric, impossibly precise stone that seemed to exist in a category all its own. This absence of traditional archaeological evidence became both the monument's greatest weakness and its most intriguing characteristic. Conventional archaeology relies on a progression of material culture. Tools evolve, pottery styles change, building techniques develop over time, but Yonaguni offered none of these familiar markers. It stood alone in time and space, challenging every methodology that researchers had developed for understanding the past. The monument's isolation wasn't just archaeological. Geographically, Yonaguni Island occupied a unique position in the Pacific. Located at the convergence of major ocean currents, it sat at the intersection of multiple geological zones. The Philippine Sea Plate, the Eurasian Plate, and the Pacific Plate all exerted their influence on this tiny speck of land. The result was an environment of constant geological activity where earthquakes, volcanic activity, and tectonic shifts had been shaping the landscape for millions of years. This geological complexity offered both explanations and complications for the monument's origin. The region's intense seismic activity could indeed account for the regular fracturing patterns that created the monument's geometric appearance, but the same forces that might have carved these shapes naturally could also have destroyed any evidence of human modification. Ancient tool marks could have been erased by earthquakes. Carved symbols could have been ground away by shifting stone. The very processes that skeptics cited as evidence against human involvement might have eliminated the proof that would settle the debate once and for all. Local folklore added another layer to the mystery. The people of Yonaguni had their own stories about the underwater structure, passed down through generations of fishermen and pearl divers. These oral traditions spoke of a time when the sea level was lower, when what was now underwater had been dry land dotted with villages and sacred sites. The stories described a great catastrophe that had swallowed the land, leaving only the highest peaks above water as the islands we see today. Such flood myths exist in cultures around the world, often dismissed by scholars as primitive attempts to explain geological changes beyond the understanding of ancient peoples. But in the context of Yonaguni, these stories took on new significance. Sea levels had indeed been dramatically lower during the last ice age. Much of what was now the East China Sea had been dry land, connecting Japan to the Asian mainland by a vast plain dotted with rivers and lakes. If humans had lived on this exposed continental shelf, their settlements would now lie beneath hundreds of feet of water. The rising seas that marked the end of the Ice Age hadn't been gradual. In some regions, sea levels had risen catastrophically quickly, inundating vast areas in a matter of centuries. Any civilization that had developed on these lowlands would have been forced to flee to higher ground or perish beneath the waves. This scenario offered a tantalizing possibility. What if the Yonaguni monument wasn't unique? What if it was simply the most visible remnant of a much larger complex of structures, most of which remain buried beneath sediment on the ocean floor? The monument's location at the edge of the continental shelf would have placed it at the shoreline during periods of lower sea level. It could have been part of a coastal settlement, with the majority of the site now lying in deeper water, unexplored and unknown. The technology to investigate this possibility was rapidly advancing. Side-scan sonar could map the seafloor with unprecedented detail. Submersible vehicles could explore depths that were impossible for human divers to reach safely. Ground-penetrating radar could reveal buried structures beneath layers of sediment. Yet despite these technological capabilities, comprehensive surveys of the area around Yonaguni remained limited. The monument continued to be studied in isolation, without the broader context that might finally resolve its mysteries. Part of the problem was funding. Large-scale underwater archaeological expeditions required enormous resources and international cooperation. Unlike terrestrial sites, underwater exploration demanded specialized equipment, expert personnel, and careful coordination with maritime authorities. The costs were prohibitive for most research institutions, especially for investigations of sites with uncertain significance. But there was another, more subtle obstacle to comprehensive research at Yonaguni. The monument had become associated with fringe theories and sensational claims that made serious academics reluctant to become involved. The site had attracted attention from ancient astronaut theorists, lost civilization enthusiasts, and New Age spiritualists, all of whom had their own interpretations of what the monument represented. This association with pseudo-scientific speculation had created a stigma that discouraged mainstream researchers from pursuing serious study of the site. The result was a curious paradox. One of the most potentially significant archaeological discoveries of the modern era was being studied primarily by a handful of individual researchers working with limited resources and minimal institutional support. The scientific establishment that should have been leading the investigation had largely retreated, leaving the field open to speculation and sensationalism. This situation wasn't unique to Yonaguni. Throughout history, discoveries that challenged conventional understanding had often been marginalized or ignored by the academic mainstream. Continental drift was ridiculed for decades before becoming accepted geological theory. The existence of meteorites was denied by scientists who couldn't imagine rocks falling from the sky. Human antiquity was systematically underestimated until the evidence became overwhelming. The pattern was familiar. Revolutionary ideas faced resistance until the weight of evidence became impossible to ignore. But Yonaguni presented a different kind of challenge. Unlike these other scientific revolutions, the monument didn't offer clear, unambiguous evidence that could eventually overcome skepticism. Instead, it offered ambiguity. Every observation could be interpreted multiple ways. Every piece of evidence supported multiple theories. The monument seemed designed to resist easy categorization, to remain forever balanced between the possible and the probable. This ambiguity had psychological effects on those who studied it. Researchers found themselves drawn into the mystery, investing years of their lives in pursuit of answers that seemed always just out of reach. Some, like Professor Kimura, became convinced that the monument held the key to rewriting human history. Others, like Dr. Schoch, remained skeptical despite finding aspects of the site genuinely puzzling. A few abandoned their research altogether, frustrated by the monument's refusal to yield definitive answers. The monument had also become a mirror, reflecting the preconceptions and biases of those who studied it. Believers in ancient advanced civilizations saw evidence of sophisticated engineering. Geological purists saw natural processes at work. Cultural romantics saw connections to lost continents and mythical kingdoms. Each group found in the monument exactly what they were looking for, and nothing that would change their minds. This pattern extended to the broader public's reception of the Yonaguni story. The monument had become a kind of Rorschach test, with people's interpretations revealing more about their own beliefs than about the structure itself. Those who were already inclined to question conventional history embraced Kimura's theories. Those who valued scientific orthodoxy sided with Schoch's natural formation hypothesis. The monument had become less a subject of objective inquiry than a symbol in a larger cultural debate about the nature of human history and the reliability of scientific consensus. Yet beneath all the speculation and debate, the monument itself remained unchanged. 25 meters beneath the Pacific surface, the massive stone structure continued its silent existence, indifferent to the passionate arguments it had inspired. Ocean currents still flowed around its terraced surfaces. Marine life still sheltered in its shadowed recesses. Coral still grew on its ancient stones, adding new layers to a structure that had already witnessed millennia of change. For the divers who visited the site, these academic debates often seemed irrelevant. Floating weightlessly above the monument's vast expanse, surrounded by the deep blue of the open ocean, visitors experienced something that transcended scientific classification. Whether natural or artificial, the structure was undeniably magnificent. Its scale was humbling, its geometry mesmerizing, its mere existence a reminder of how much about our planet remained unknown and unexplored. The monument had also become a pilgrimage site of sorts, attracting visitors from around the world who came not just to see the structure itself, but to experience the mystery it represented. These weren't necessarily believers in ancient advanced civilizations or proponents of any particular theory. They were simply people drawn to one of the few remaining places on Earth where fundamental questions about human history remained genuinely open, where the possibility of discovery still existed, where mystery had not yet been entirely conquered by explanation. In an age of satellites and sensors, where every corner of the Earth's surface had been mapped and catalogued, Yonaguni offered something increasingly rare, the unknown. Not the unknown of distant galaxies or microscopic particles, but the unknown of human history, of our own past, of the civilizations that might have existed and vanished before recorded history began. The monument stood as a testament to the limits of our knowledge and a challenge to our assumptions about the past. Whether that challenge would ever be definitively answered remained to be seen. New technologies continued to emerge that might finally resolve the monument's mysteries. Advanced dating techniques could potentially determine the age of tool marks, if they existed. Sophisticated imaging systems could reveal details invisible to the human eye. Comprehensive seafloor mapping could uncover additional structures that might provide the broader context the monument lacked. But perhaps the most important question wasn't whether these technologies would solve the mystery of Yonaguni. Perhaps the most important question was whether we were prepared for the answers they might provide. Because if the monument truly was artificial, if it really did represent the work of an advanced civilization from the dawn of human history, then everything we thought we knew about our species' past would need to be reconsidered. The implications would extend far beyond archaeology. They would touch on fundamental questions about human nature, about the rise and fall of civilizations, about the fragility of knowledge and the possibility of forgetting. They would force us to confront the uncomfortable possibility that we are not the first technological civilization to arise on Earth, and perhaps not destined to be the last. Standing at this crossroads between known and unknown, between the orthodox and the revolutionary, the Yonaguni monument continued to challenge us with questions that had no easy answers. And in that challenge lay perhaps its greatest value, regardless of its ultimate origin. As the years passed and technology advanced, new players entered the Yonaguni arena, each bringing fresh perspectives and cutting-edge tools to bear on the ancient mystery. Marine archaeologists began deploying sophisticated underwater robotics capable of capturing high-resolution 3D imagery of the monument's most intricate details. These remotely operated vehicles could spend hours at depths that would exhaust human divers, methodically documenting every surface, every angle, every potential clue. The results were spectacular and frustrating in equal measure. The new imaging revealed the monument in unprecedented detail, showing textures and features that had never been clearly visible before. But rather than settling the debate, these enhanced images only deepened the mystery. Features that appeared obviously artificial in low-resolution photographs looked more ambiguous under intense scrutiny. Surfaces that seemed smooth and worked showed natural weathering patterns. Yet other areas displayed characteristics that were harder to explain through purely geological processes. One of the most intriguing developments came from an unexpected source: climate science. As researchers developed increasingly sophisticated models of sea level change during the last ice age, they began to paint a clearer picture of when and how the Yonaguni area had been submerged. The data revealed that the transition from dry land to underwater had been neither gradual nor uniform. Instead, the region had experienced multiple periods of rapid sea level rise, interspersed with relatively stable intervals. This new understanding of the area's flooding history opened up previously unconsidered possibilities. If the monument was artificial, its builders would have had to work within very specific time windows when the structure was above water, but the sea was already rising. The pressure to complete such a massive construction project before inevitable inundation would have required remarkable organizational capabilities and an almost desperate sense of urgency. The climate data also revealed something else. The monument's current depth of 25 meters placed it at what would have been the ancient shoreline during certain periods of lower sea level. This wasn't the deep interior of a vanished landmass, but the edge of the world as it existed thousands of years ago. If ancient peoples had indeed modified the natural rock formation, they would have been working at the very margin of their known world, perhaps creating a monument that served as both practical structure and symbolic marker of the boundary between land and sea. Meanwhile, advances in underwater archaeology at other sites around the world were providing new context for understanding what might be possible at Yonaguni. In the Mediterranean, researchers were discovering that ancient civilizations had been far more sophisticated in their maritime capabilities than previously believed. Harbors, breakwaters, and even artificial islands dating back thousands of years were being found beneath the waves. The technical knowledge required to work with stone in marine environments was clearly more widespread in the ancient world than modern scholars had assumed. So where does that leave us with Japan's Atlantis? After nearly 4 decades of passionate debate, the Yonaguni monument remains exactly what it has always been: a profound question mark carved in stone beneath the Pacific waves. Whether shaped by geological forces over millions of years or crafted by human hands in prehistory, it stands as a reminder that our planet still holds mysteries we haven't solved. And perhaps that's exactly as it should be.